Thank you very much. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. Especially, it's my first time in South Africa, and it's like I'm here while history is made. So it's incredible. Yeah, thanks again for having me here. So what I'll do is, as Jopi said, and by the way, I find it strange to hold the mic. It's been a while. It's like feels like karaoke a bit, but. So I'm the co-founder of Meta Profiling and also a full-time academic, and both at the company that I work for and in my research, what I deal with is this concept of entrepreneurship and innovation. And really what I try to do is find an evidence-based way to increase innovation within organizations, or let's say find individuals with the entrepreneurial talent that are going to take organizations forward, but also potentially succeed as entrepreneurs. And also thinking about how we can create an environment for these individuals in terms of an ecosystem where they can operate that facilitates those entrepreneurial tendencies, let's say. So today's talk is really about a trend that has been triggered by technological innovation. And obviously there are a number of trends. The trend that I'm interested in is this whole thing of the increase in entrepreneurship and companies needing to be more entrepreneurial, and so do people. So technology has unleashed innovation and entrepreneurship, and the consequence of that, I think it's a double-edged sword really. The consequence is that companies need to become more entrepreneurial, and that's a double-edged sword. And people are becoming more like entrepreneurs. So it affects both people and businesses, and probably also sort of regions and more globally as well. So that's the talk, and let's start first with sort of clarifying what we're talking about here. So, is the world becoming more entrepreneurial? What do we think? Yes? Okay, good participation, nice. The answer is it depends on what we mean by entrepreneurship. So you won't really see what this is, but you can see that there is a graph with sort of a downward slope, right? And this is basically the self-employment rate or startup rate in the OECD countries from 1955 to 2013. Okay, so you can see that there's a downward slope in a way, meaning that the startup rate has decreased substantially since 1958, and there's been a perpetual decline in startup rate. So if we talk about sort of entrepreneurship in terms of startups, then the world isn't becoming more entrepreneurial. But if we talk about it in terms of capacity for innovation and speed of innovation, then certainly the world is becoming more entrepreneurial. And you will probably know this from all the technologies that are coming out all the time. It's almost difficult to sort of pay attention to everything that's coming out these days, right? It's the new big thing is around the corner almost on weekly basis. But one thing is clear is that some of these technologies are having a disruptive effect, whether that's on businesses, whether that's on people, and like I said, potentially nations as well. This is just a report from McKinsey. There are others as well. They've just condensed it to 12 disruptive technologies, and the effect of these technologies by 2025, they estimate is going to be $35 trillion a year. So disruptive technology, we can't deny, is having an impact on businesses, on people, of course, but also on regions as well. And one thing with technology is that, of course, it's or let's say technological innovation is that it's exponential in that it unleashes even more innovation, right? So once you have a big innovation, it opens the doors for a flood of innovation as well. Think of the internet, think of the blockchain, think of many of these disruptive technologies, the amount of innovation that they can release, if you like. And you can see this in the global innovation output sort of in the last 10 years or so. And And of course, innovation, and this is just patents. It's not a sort of perfect measure of innovation, of course, but you can see that patent numbers have increased. And of course, innovation doesn't happen in every industry, not to the same extent at least. Some industries are more innovative than others, with technology, information technology being the main one, telecommunications and automotive being the other ones. But one thing is clear, in every industry, innovation is happening, it's increasing, and the pace is increasing as well. And here's R&D spend, another sort of form of measure of innovation, I guess, a metric, not perfect, but a good one. And of course, some companies, or there will be a few companies that account for most of the R&D spend in the world, but you can see even those companies have increased their R&D spend exponentially. And this is the thing. Innovation obviously gives you competitive advantage. It gives you ability to do more R&D, invest more in R&D, which gives you a competitive advantage again. So there's a virtuous circle there. If you like, I think there's a side effect to that, but there is some sort of virtuous circle for innovation, or exponential effect, if you like. And I think the scariest thing almost is the speed of innovation these days. It's the diffusion of innovation that is now to an extreme level, which is why most companies and people probably as well are struggling to keep up, and probably governments as well. So the time span for innovation reaching 50% of household. So if we think about the telephone, it took 70 years. For the radio, it took 28 years, and for internet access, it took 10 years. Okay, time span for innovation reaching 10 million users. In 2004, Facebook took 852 days. Twitter in 2006, 780 days. Google Plus in 2011, 16 days. Innovation diffusion is going at a scary rate, really. And of course, that's innovation is changing business models as well, the way things are done. I mean, now, we know the figures about robots being able to do a lot of the activities that humans can. And, depending on whether you're a pessimist or an optimist, you will see that as a good thing or a bad thing, being replaced or being able to sort of do better work because robots are doing all the mundane tasks. But for sure, we are experiencing a change in business models in the workplace, where we now have to interact with, from a psychological point of view, most people are disengaged, and now we have to interact with robots. It's like, come on, really. But yeah, so business models are changing. We have the gig economy, the sharing economy, on-demand economy, if you like. Fiverr. Have you heard of Fiverr? Yes, so for those of you who haven't heard of Fiverr, it's a company where for anything from $5 and up, you can get done, whether that's designing an app, building a website, writing a PhD. You can. I have certainly had students getting MSc projects from Fiverr. That's recorded, but anyway, that's a joke. That's a joke. But yeah, traditionally the gig economy was for sort of the mundane task, you would say, but increasingly it's in very regulated areas, highly consequential sort of industries. So medicas, where you can hire doctors like you hire Uber. So you would just sort of hire a doctor and they would be at your door 2 hours later. Lawyers, you can do the same thing as well. So it's becoming sort of much more common, and obviously it's a big thing. It's actually a disruptive technology and a disruptive business model, if you like, with just the sort of in between 2013 and 2015, the total transaction value of the gig economy tripled. So obviously, and people are talking about now we're going to have sort of on-demand managers, on-demand leaders, and all of that. So obviously things that are potentially disrupting a lot of the business models that we have here. And the on-demand economy is, of course, enabled by the sharing economy, right? So today, sorry, not sharing economy, rating economy. So today, everyone is rated just like products. You know, we started with rating products, now we're rating people. And that was, I guess, the eBay model first, and then Amazon started. And initially, we didn't trust the ratings, but then with 4,000 ratings, it's like you trust it more than you trust your neighbors. And that's actually true, because people in the ride-sharing service, BlaBlaCars, they trust people they've never met in that ride. Then they trust them more than they trust their neighbors. This is real stats. You know, you get rated everywhere. I mean, you rate Uber drivers rate you. Glassdoor, you rate your managers. This is obviously Tinder. And then you have Rate My Professor in the US, where you're rated on overall quality, helpfulness, clarity, easiness, and hotness. So this is the taxonomy of, I guess, I don't know, professors. This is a cafe in San Francisco where you can date someone and you get ratings about them from other people on how they were in the date or how they are as a mate or something. It's a complex world. This simplifies the world, I guess, if you like. No, I'm just joking there as well. But now you can also rate the raters, right? So you rate the raters as well, and it's becoming just sort of an amazing rating system. So this is why, I mean, basically performance management can almost be replaced by this, right? So doctors now in the US, health grades, you use health grades to decide whether that's a good doctor or not, whether you want to see them or not. You don't need any performance ratings anymore. So obviously that also means that we are all becoming, we have to really, you know, you're being rated everywhere, social media, whatever it is. You have to be quite self-absorbed. You have to think about your reputation, online reputation. And there are companies that do online reputation, right? So they will sort of deal with your online reputation, help you sort of bump up your reviews, let's say. And, you know, that kind of increases that self-absorption a bit, right? And this is the Times article where we see sort of the me generation. I don't know if you've seen this. The millennials are lazy, entitled narcissists, it says. So they are or they're not? Do you agree? Are they spoiled? No. I have evidence that they are, though. So this is work values and materialism. Willing to work overtime to do the best job? Not at all. Expect to own a new car every 2 or 3 years? Far more. Owning a vacation house? Far more. This is the narcissism levels since the 80s, the way they've increased.
Does it include Trump or exclude?
Does it include what? Trump. I'm not sure, but I mean, I would guess that it probably would bump the levels up substantially, significantly. And this is not comparing sort of the new, you know, the older generation versus the younger generation. It's literally comparing, you know, 20 to 30-year-olds across different generations. But can you really blame people for being sort of more self-absorbed when, you know, toddlers, you know, 63% of toddlers have smartphones nowadays. It's really difficult to blame people for being self-absorbed. But again, this leads obviously to a whole different kind of consumer, a whole different kind of workforce, different motivational, I guess, factors that one needs to think about in organizations. So this is what I mean with technological effects. You know, it increases efficiency, productivity, but it also has a number of different effects like changing workforce, changing business models, and of course it leads to exponential innovation. And some say that this would lead to a Falk society. Do you know what this Falk stands for? Fully automated luxury communism, where you are basically, you don't have to do anything. You have 3D printers to print you everything, including food. You don't have to shop. You have robots to do everything for you. Almost no working hours. I think it's pretty far from that. I feel like my workload is actually increasing rather than decreasing. So it seems like a bit far away from that. But I think technology has these potential positive effects, but we also have like technological side effects as well. So anyway, the effect on business, is obviously substantial. So now I hear a lot of businesses talking about incorporating new technologies and sort of almost panicking about all the new technology that's out there and how we incorporate that in order to stay relevant and keep up with all these new startups that are introducing all these technologies. So introducing new technologies, but also incorporating the gig economy, where the gig economy, I guess, is also something that's more and more, it makes business sense as well, where the labor is much cheaper often, and workers are hyper specialized to do the work. So it starts making economic sense as well, and organizations are becoming flatter, far flatter now than they were a couple of decades ago. But I guess the main effect on business is the competition. Yeah, so the competition is actually much tighter now. A lot of pressure from above, from the sort of tech companies, the titans, and from all the startups that are enabled now through new technology. So if you look at these companies here, what do they have in common? They're all worth less than WhatsApp. Okay, a text messaging app that at the time when it was bought hadn't made a penny, had 55 employees. I mean, you might have seen this this particular slide. You know, some of these companies didn't even exist a decade ago. So we see quite a big change in terms of the pressure, the competition that companies are facing. In the 60s, the average lifespan in the S&P 500 index was 60 years, and now it's more like 12 years. Okay, and this is stats for you. 52% of companies in the Fortune 500 have gone bankrupt, been acquired, or ceased to exist since the 2000s. And there's this saying that in the S&P 500, in about 10 years or so, most companies will be companies we've never heard of. So clearly there's sort of this whole pressure for companies to actually start changing, and executives are really sort of picking up on that. Most industries now, executives anticipate moderate or massive disruption, and this is just by digital. Just by digital, executives are sort of expecting massive disruption. And of course, disruption comes from many different parts, right? So, like I said, technology is one thing, but new business models, regulatory changes, and new consumer expectations are certainly areas from which disruption is coming increasingly. So, what I want to do is just to get you thinking a bit in the room and sort of a few minutes just discuss in your tables this question here. So, the company I work for or work with, I know some of you might be independent consultants, so you can choose either, will need to become more innovative to survive and thrive in the next 10 to 15 years. If you like, you can say strongly disagree to strongly agree rather than yes or no. So I just want a show of hands, really, of people, I guess, who answered yes to the question. So show of hands. That feels like 100% of the room. Actually, just keep your hands up again. And okay, so that's just for the next question. Keep your hands up if the answer is yes again.
It's a real killer question.
It is a killer question because it's like you're sitting with your boss, and it's of course, yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, I think actually it was about. There's still one hand up. You definitely have the strategy. Very good. We'll speak later. But I think the sort of the figures are fairly similar when you do sort of surveys with with organizations. This is Accenture doing a research. To what extent is your company's success dependent on innovation? 84% of executives say very dependent or extremely dependent. And yet you look at the figures and only 7% of executives consider their companies capable of addressing the effects of technology-driven changes, and only 27% say innovation is fully integrated in their strategic planning, and 82% are unhappy with company innovations. So there's a real need for innovation. I think the reason to why we see these figures is probably because it's happened so fast. People have not had the time to adapt or even think about the strategy. It's just, but we are certainly there where we're not exactly sure what to do, and strategies are unclear. So that's the sort of side effects on, or if technological effects on business, let's say, and innovation on business. There's also, of course, effects on people, and of course, although we see productivity having sort of been going up since the 1950s, real-time wages since the 1970s has been stagnating, and that's, for people this is quite important. And like I said, this real figures in terms of the automation of jobs, and about 50% of jobs actually can be automated, and this is a real risk for many workers. And although we are talking about the gig economy and all that, the gig economy also has some disadvantages. I mean, you are in competition with other people in the gig economy. You're in competition with employees. If you're an employee, you're in competition with other employees, but also with people from the gig economy. If you are in the gig economy, you are specializing in certain tasks, but in the end, you become so hyper-specialized, it almost becomes like a digital assembly line, basically, where you're basically doing the same thing over and over again, and it's not necessarily the most rewarding thing. Not everyone wants to promote themselves either, as the gig economy requires. I mean, technology is, I guess, linear, but psychology is normally distributed. Yeah, so not everyone can be entrepreneurial. Not everyone can market themselves very well. Not everyone can exploit those opportunities that are out there, or recognize the opportunities that are out there. And so there's a real issue with entrepreneurship in general as well. What do 90% of entrepreneurs have in common? This. Can you figure it out? Yeah, overworked and underpaid. That's what 90% of entrepreneurs have in common. This is just, you can compare hourly wages with self-employed wages. And I think, the whole kind of concept of entrepreneurship is sort of over-romanticized, and the realities are quite different. I mean, you will hear in the UK, every new prime minister will come and say, we are all for entrepreneurship, we will increase entrepreneurship, we will invest in entrepreneurship. And that's kind of unconditional investment they're often talking about. And obviously that's an issue even from a sort of national standpoint. Do you know which country in the world has most entrepreneurs?
Probably Israel.
Israel, US? No, it's Guinea actually. 90% are entrepreneurs. So, there's, if you look at the sort of graph, there's a quite good negative correlation between the economic standing of a nation and the number of startups. Yeah.
Is it survivalist or opportunity-driven entrepreneurs?
What do you think?
That one, I would suspect survivalist.
Necessity entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
I mean, that's clear. A lot of people would say, when I ask this question, a lot of people would say US, Israel. Actually, when you look at it, it's one of the lowest sort of, let's say, startup rates in the US. And you can see the average wages are much higher than when you have very high self-employment rates. The average wages go down substantially. So in a way, what I'm trying to say is that most entrepreneurs don't actually engage in entrepreneurship, which is the innovation bit, exploitation of opportunities. Most entrepreneurs don't engage in it. And if you look at sort of millennials and the new generation, especially in the Western world, most of them want to be entrepreneurs, right? Why is that? Why do young people want to be entrepreneurs? I think the reason is twofold. One is the whole media sort of portrayal of entrepreneurs. You get sort of Elon Musk and this and Facebook and all that, and then people are like, yeah, I can be like that, a millionaire. You can do whatever you want. You don't have to wear a suit. Perfect. And this is this is what sort of this article is talking about. It's a great title. I wish I came up with it myself, but where we are sort of obsessed with entrepreneurship, and it's a very dangerous obsession in a way. I think that's one reason. The other reason, of course, is that people generally don't like their jobs. I mean, when you Google my manager, this is what, if you have a manager that sort of hates you, bullies you, obviously, and this is not just Google. I mean, you can check the Gallup surveys. The worst part of a job is a person's manager, right? So people think, look, I hate my job. I can be a millionaire with being my own boss and all of that. It's so romantic. And then think, well, I'm going to start a business. But the fact is that, like I said, entrepreneurial talent is normally distributed. Not everyone is suited for an entrepreneurial environment. In fact, 90% will end up underpaid and overworked. So the entrepreneurial dilemma really is this. Technology has unleashed innovation and entrepreneurship. Businesses need to become more entrepreneurial to compete, yet very few have an idea of how to do it. And currently, it's not done very well. The majority don't know how to do it. People are becoming more like entrepreneurs, but the entrepreneur's lifestyle is actually one where you're underpaid and overworked, not very glamorous. So the question, of course, is how do we optimize entrepreneurship, right? And I don't necessarily mean how do we increase it, how do we optimize it? But 74 million results when you say, how do I increase corporate innovation? You look at the academic literature, 16,000 peer-reviewed papers, and you look at the entrepreneurship literature, another few thousand there. So again, you can think, is it because there's not enough information, or is it because there's too much information that we don't know how to do this stuff? We've tried to review the literature, the academic literature rather than Google, on how to increase innovation. Very difficult task to do. A lot of contradictions as well as some good stuff. I guess what can definitely be taken out as, let's say, a few rules of thumb. A couple of rules of thumb plus, I guess, a sort of conditional component that we can take away from the literature, the academic literature on how to increase innovation. The first rule of thumb is this. Well, we have technology, we have AI and machines, but one thing we definitely know is that even though we see some signs of creativity in AI, you won't see a machine sort of pitching an idea to a manager anytime soon. Yeah, so machines won't be sort of going asking for investment from venture capitalists. People still have to do it, and that's for sure. People still have to come up with the innovative ideas. Booking.com, machines will do a much better job in recommending hotels, but a machine won't invent Booking.com nor invent Airbnb. So people still have to do this whole innovation bit, creativity bit, and that's obviously an ingredient of two things. The amount of information you have stored in your knowledge, and the willingness and ability to connect those pieces in information in a way that predicts consumer demand. And what I mean by that, a lot of people might think, well, why do I need information stored in memory? Everything is on Google. The reason you need it is because you can't Google, give me a nice product or the next big thing. You can take information, but that information has to be in your brain, not outside your brain, for you to be able to connect those pieces of information. Therefore, and people will differ in the amount of information they have in their memory, and therefore they will also differ in the willingness to make those connections between those pieces of information, and of course the ability to make those connections in a way that predicts consumer demand. But that's really the first rule of thumb in terms of innovation. People have to do it, and there are significant individual differences between people's ability and tendency to do that. The second rule of thumb is that no matter how innovative you are, you can only do it if you have the resources, are allowed to do it, and encouraged to do it. So, no matter, even if you're Elon Musk, if you have a manager that just says, I'm not going to listen to your ideas, we don't need any new ideas here, just get on with your work, you're not going to have any innovation. It's very simple. So this is what we call the innovation or the entrepreneurial ecosystem, the innovation ecosystem, if you like. So really, innovation output must be the result of entrepreneurial talent and times entrepreneurial ecosystem. And the sort of, note that it's not an additive, but it's a multiplicative effect. So if you have zero in either, you will have zero innovation output, okay? And in a way, that means that if you have a manager that doesn't allow for innovation, you can't just go and say, I'm going to hire the employees of Google, I'm going to hire the employees of Tesla or Facebook, whatever it may be. They're not going to be able to do anything, and very likely they will be disengaged and leave back to Google, Facebook, or other competitors, right? So you can't take away one from the other. And again, conversely, no matter how much you spend on sort of decorating the offices, putting golf courses in the offices, large teddy bears and whatever it may be. This is the Google offices in Boston. If you don't have people who can actually come up with very good ideas, again, you're not going to have much innovation. So this is what we say, why we say entrepreneurial talent times entrepreneurial ecosystem. And the sort of conditional effect to that is that it's all relative and contextual. It's not general and absolute. So you will hear people talking about giving employees 20% time off, allowing them to take risks, having flatter structures, spending on R&D, all these things to become more innovative. But I mean, this is the R&D spend of the top companies. Amazon spent $13 billion on R&D. I mean, if you are a law firm or a hotel chain, you're not going to spend $13 billion on R&D. You're not competing on the output with these companies. Why should you compete on the input? You don't need, as entrepreneurial people, you don't need as entrepreneurial ecosystems as these companies. If you're a law firm, you need to be slightly more entrepreneurial than other law firms. That's the key. You need to be slightly more entrepreneurial. This is what it is, and it's not about competing with Tesla or Amazon, right? This is what I think a lot of companies are scared when you say you need to be more entrepreneurial. It's not more entrepreneurial in terms of giving lawyers 20% time off. They don't even have 1% time off. So maybe start there, I guess. 0.5% time off on pet projects. So entrepreneurial talent and ecosystem is relative and contextual, not absolute and general. So really, what it all boils down to for organizations to become more entrepreneurial is these two questions. The first is, how do I compare to my competitors in entrepreneurial talent? And the second, how do I compare to my competitors in this entrepreneurial ecosystem? You can look at it from a different way, and you can think about this for yourselves. Ask this question. So in terms of the amount of entrepreneurial talent we have, whether that's employees and leaders, compared to competitors, my organization is in the top what? I think this is the key question you need to ask yourselves. This is how you measure entrepreneur. I think that the other thing is, of course, who are your competitors? That's a critical question, because if you're just, say you're a law firm and or a financial institution and you say, my competitors are other financial institutions, but maybe it's those fintechs or other startups, then if they are on the verge of disrupting you, they are your competitors, and you then need to compare yourself with them. So the question is, whatever industry you're in, which one are you here? And it can be strategic not to be at the top, that's for sure. But certainly you don't want to be down there. So that's the first question. How do I compare to my competitors in entrepreneurial talent? You might ask, what is entrepreneurial talent? How do I know how I compare myself to entrepreneurial? The pitch comes now, yes. This is the stuff that I do. It has to come. We've done a lot of research on this with various universities. We've worked with a lot of companies, including sort of governmental support and sort of public company support. We've sort of tested over 250,000 people now. And we have over 100 empirical studies. I am yet to write up for peer review many of them. They're on my desk. But in essence, there's a lot of research behind this, but there are 4 key things when we think about entrepreneurial talent. And you know, I'm not going to go into the details, but these 4 key things are what we call creativity, whether that's originality, divergent thinking, thinking outside the box, going against the status quo. Opportunism is to connect the dots or find new means, ends, relationships. So finding new ends for existing means or existing means for new ends. Yeah, so connecting the dots. It is to exploit those opportunities of productivity, to take the risk, to have the drive, to have the goal focus, to exploit those opportunities. And then finally, vision, to have the desire to change things for the better, make big changes, not just for yourselves, but for people around you, to create value and thinking about the future. Again, I'm not going to go into it too much. If you're curious to know more about the sort of theory behind all of this, we've published this book recently where there's a chapter on it with the theory behind it. And even if you're not interested, I would still encourage you to buy a copy, and maybe 2. Why not? So obviously the second one is, can we actually, so that's the theoretical bit of, this is us sort of doing lots of research and reviewing the literature, but can we identify this entrepreneurial talent? And again, we've done 8 years of research on this. We've used a number of assessments, whether that's situational judgment tests, psychometric testing, game-based assessments, even sort of fMRI scanning to look at differences between entrepreneurial and less entrepreneurial people. And we can confidently say that we can identify entrepreneurial talent with 85% accuracy, and we can probably do better than that as well. And this is with both employees, but also sort of high growth entrepreneurs. So this is just an example of sort of high impact entrepreneurs who grow 20 to 35% and have sort of 50 employees versus those who have much lower growth. We can have clear impact there. And when we look at entrepreneurial talent, we also see in our research that it's the best predictor of innovation, output, and entrepreneurship. These are the bivariate correlations. The multivariate correlations tend to be higher. But the bottom line is we can identify entrepreneurial talent, but of course that's not enough. So managing entrepreneurship is more than just identifying entrepreneurial talent. Yes, entrepreneurial employees will produce significantly higher innovation output, but they will only do so if they're in the right ecosystems, as I said. So bureaucratic cultures tend to disengage entrepreneurial individuals, and when they are disengaged, they're far more likely to quit an organization than less entrepreneurial people. So then the next question, of course, is not only what is your entrepreneurial talent pool like, but also what is your entrepreneurial ecosystem like, right? And again, I'm not going to go into the details of the ecosystem components. This is some research that we've done, but basically it's down to things like, does your senior and line management promote innovation, allow innovative ideas? Do they reward innovation? Are decisions made quickly enough? Is knowledge shared, that knowledge that's critical for the ideas? And then is there teamwork and ideation going on as well? And again, this is all relative. We don't think, we have to suddenly start promoting innovation. It's relative to your competitors. Okay, so just thinking about it in these terms, to what extent do you agree with these following statements? Leaders in my organization. Just think about it for yourselves, really. Another one? Notice that I ask about how you compare to competitors all the time, because that's key. It's not about do you allow people to take risks, but do you allow them to take risks more than your competitors. So really what you need to be thinking about is where do you stand relatively in these things. I mean, this is a hypothetical scenario, but you probably don't want to be there, right? And this is what we are sort of talking about when we talk about talent times ecosystem. And this is sort of a massive simplification of the whole thing. But we have very clear evidence that organizations who are sort of further up to the right are far more likely to innovate and therefore be more competitors than those who either get one of those right or both wrong, of course. But and I think, you know, if again, a lot of organizations will focus a lot on one of these aspects and forget the other. And this has obviously a key impact on the competitiveness of organizations, right? Getting this right is a key thing for the competitiveness of organizations. Because in essence you need to innovate, and in order to innovate you need these things, but innovation also enables you to compete, not only as organizations but even nations, if you think about it. So the more organizations are able to do that, the more that's going to have an economic impact. And this is just a World Bank report from last year. Again, the figures, you know, you might have seen it, you can decide it, but a critical contributing factor to the sort of less or lower productivity in South Africa has been contributed to the insufficient innovation efforts of private firms. Okay, in South Africa, this is what the report also says, is that gazelles or young high-growth firms is the lowest in emerging economies. And these are the exact companies that are the ones that make the difference, right? So the companies that are high growth are the ones that the ones in the sort of in the middle ground. So not the modest majority. We have the modest majority. Then we have the sort of what you call the missing middle often. But the companies in the middle, high impact companies, in the US created over 160,000 jobs between 2011 and 2013. In Mexico, it would take 273,000 new microfinance companies to increase GDP by 1%, but only 105 mid-sized high-impact companies. So you can imagine that this is the stuff that you need, and this is a function of the innovation of capability of companies. And I think, you know, when you take a bigger picture perspective, there is a lot of wasted entrepreneurial talent, and I'm not talking about any particular continent here, whether that's you know, in your country or whether that's Western Europe or the US. I think there's a lot of wasted entrepreneurial talent simply because of the nature of the, if you like, the economy right now. But I specifically mean the business models that are out there. So if you think about larger organizations who are often, you know, very established organizations who often don't have a real sort of mechanism for facilitating or mechanism for supporting and developing entrepreneurial talent, let alone identifying them. There's all, you know, we can clearly see there's a failure to value or at least do innovation in large organizations, which either leads to disengagement of, you know, entrepreneurial talent, which often forces them out, or on a more broad economic terms, it leads to lower competitiveness in the market, in the global market, which leads to higher unemployment, and again drives employees to this next thing, which is the need to create your own company, which is obviously as a result often of not liking your boss or being unemployed. But startup, probability of you making any difference in terms of innovation, which is what a nation needs, is minute. So we don't need people starting lots of companies when there's only 2% chance of innovation. And most of these, in fact, will fail. So 70% of them will actually fail, either go back to regular employment here, or go back to unemployment, and in both cases they need to go to startup again because we don't have the facility. So you can see that, in a way, my personal view is that there's a lot of wasted entrepreneurial talent out there. And why I say entrepreneurial talent, I'm going to get back to why I say I think there's a waste of entrepreneurial talent beyond this as well. But I think entrepreneurship is, or optimizing entrepreneurship, therefore, is about two things, really. The first one, I think, is the ability to increase corporate entrepreneurship or corporate innovation. So again, this is for the competitiveness not only of organizations, but also for organizations to be able to employ more people. You need to have corporate innovation. And that includes things like identifying entrepreneurial talent. It includes things like creating ecosystems which fosters the mindset of behavior. And again, I don't mean becoming entrepreneurial. I mean becoming slightly more entrepreneurial than you currently are. And again, if you're thinking about, if your competitors are maybe international competitors, and if you're thinking from a macroeconomic perspective, then that's your competitors. And that's the sort of benchmark to which you need to become slightly more entrepreneurial beyond. If your ecosystem isn't as good as the external competitors, then you should set that benchmark. The second step of, or the second component of optimizing entrepreneurship, I think, is that we need to sort of stop thinking about sort of just promoting startups. That's, again, there's a clear, if you have lots of startups in your country, it's probably because there's not enough jobs there, and there's a macroeconomic issue. So it's not about supporting it's not about unconditional support for entrepreneurs. It is about identifying those who are most likely to grow, and focus your efforts on investing in those, because those will create the jobs that are needed for people to be employed, and therefore not have to start lots of businesses that don't do any innovation. This is what I mean by stop wasting entrepreneurial talent. Even statistically, out of those 98% who fail, statistically, many of them will be talented. It's just normal distribution. It's not 2%. It doesn't make any sense. So that means that actually the occupation of being an entrepreneur is just a very difficult occupation to succeed in. It's not that only the sort of incompetent people go to become entrepreneurs. Clearly, it's a very competitive market. It's a very difficult occupation to be in. So a lot of people who are talented are going to fail as entrepreneurs. So why not then try to optimize that waste by perhaps taking those single failures and combining them into composites that are much stronger and able to grow? I mean, just as an example, this is some research we are doing where we're trying to find out how we can compose random people who are, let's say, thinking about starting their own company, compose random people into teams to optimize or to predict the optimal success of companies. And again, you can, and we have some evidence that we can do that, and it's not always 2 people or 3 people. Sometimes you say these 6 people plus that particular person part-time. With machine learning techniques, it's actually possible to do these things. It's not easy, but it's possible. So we can stop wasting entrepreneurial talent. Or why not say, with the same algorithms, we can say we take all of that wasted entrepreneurial talent, we put them into high-growth startups to help that high-growth startups in a strategic way. So strategically placing wasted talent into high-growth firms. And I think that's the most entrepreneurial thing you can do. And utilize the less entrepreneurial. I'm talking a lot about the sort of entrepreneurial talent. It's almost like it's an entrepreneur's world, but it wouldn't be nothing without the less entrepreneurial, is my next sort of point that I'm trying to make. Anyway, that wasn't a joke that worked, clearly. I need to practice some jokes. It's like sometimes it's the first time and you kind of get what works and what doesn't. Anyway, so utilize the less entrepreneurial. This is the same research that we're doing, and what we are finding is that it's not about putting lots of entrepreneurial people in the same team when we're trying sort of team effectiveness. In fact, what we're finding is that for every entrepreneurial person, you need 2 who are less entrepreneurial. So if you put 3 people who are really entrepreneurial in a team, they will be as ineffective as 3 people who are low in entrepreneurial talent. Okay, and the best composition is to have a 1-to-2 ratio for every one entrepreneurial person, 2 non-entrepreneurial people. It's not it's an ambitious sort of vision, I guess, but I think there is good evidence that it works, and I don't see how one can argue that it's not worth it. Anyway, so I guess I want to sort of give you a bit of time to discuss 2 questions. Again, just a few minutes, and then I'll open for discussion. But a few minutes just to discuss amongst yourselves, what are the main barriers for increasing corporate entrepreneurship, and what strategies potentially might there be for overcoming them? And what are the main barriers for helping entrepreneurs to grow, and what strategies might there be to overcome them? Okay, just a few minutes again in your groups. Yeah, I'll get a few opinions actually on what you think here. So what are the main barriers for increasing corporate entrepreneurship, and what strategies might there be to overcome them? Yeah, so we're trying to do the same with, and this is maybe using things like images rather than standard questions or IQ testing or whatever it may be, but identify people who are actually more likely to be entrepreneurial and more likely to grow businesses early on. I think it's hugely important, especially for education, to focus on that as well. I don't know how it is here, but certainly in Europe, we don't have much education for young individuals to just think entrepreneurially, to think about opportunities and how you exploit opportunities. Think about how you, vision and creativity, all of these things. It's not part of the education system. You would have to go to a specific entrepreneurship course, maybe as a master's, and then it would be just the very basic business skills to set up a business, which is not focusing on the person at all. It's just focusing on that. So the individual differences are completely disregarded. So everyone gets the same business skills training, and that's it. Very comfortable and when you're comfortable, you're less likely to be just to be thinking as an entrepreneur, thinking entrepreneurially, if you like. And I completely agree with that, and which is why a lot of the large corporates are completely stifled and unable to react to to the pressures that they have. And I guess then it becomes the question of, individuals and companies like yourselves, in regions such as these, who are almost forced to think entrepreneurially for in order to make a difference. How do you create more of those? How do you create an ecosystem where more companies can actually grow? And I'm guessing, I don't know the size of your company, but let's say that you would be somewhere in the missing middle, a mid-sized company. And then how do you create an ecosystem where the modest majority sort of moves towards your direction in that volatile environment? So it's a double-edged sword. You're either too comfortable, but then you have, on the other hand, you have lots of people who are employed, and large organizations are still the ones that do come up with the biggest innovations. And that's, it's very rare that a startup would have sort of the major innovations. And usually it's the large corporates that sort of bring in the biggest innovations. And but at the same time, lots of large corporates. Then there's the sort of vicious circle of things. But yeah, for you, I guess for South Africa, it's the question: how do you move it to the missing middle bit? And I think it's thinking a bit more about. Well, there's probably a lot of complicated issues, but certainly thinking about the thing of removing this notion of unconditional investment. When there is money, you should think about how you spend it. Make sure that you get a return on that investment. Why do startups fail? So often. And there are a number of sort of common reasons, but often these are just very basic things like bad planning, business planning, the bad product, very imitative products, bad recruitment. It's very, like the reasons for failure are very, very basic, basic mistakes that people make with their business decisions. And I think that's often a function of potentially underestimation of how difficult it is to actually create and run a business. And I think the people that don't underestimate it are those in developing countries who are not really making a lot of money, but they're not failing either. They survive long term because they don't underestimate how much money they will make and how successful they will be. It's just a necessity, and you will see them being entrepreneurs for the rest of their lives. But if you look at more developed countries, it's very basic mistakes, which I think often is a function of very high expectations, which are very unrealistic, where you don't have the ability. But just on a broader macro level, it's just a very difficult thing to start your own company and go in and sort of compete with us and do all the things that you need to do. That imagine the large organizations that have specific dedicated people to do all of the different functions, and you're trying to sort of build that yourself. I think most people aren't really suited for an occupation like that, to grow a business from start. I think that's just a very difficult thing to do. I think there's a curse of innovation as well. So I don't want necessarily to be promoting innovation too much, even though it does. I think there needs to be responsible innovation as well, which is why I'm careful to say, start as but in theory, if you want to develop those skills and you believe that in this environment which requires those skills, you would be helping those young people to actually thrive in this environment by having those skills, then it should start as early as possible. Why not? I don't see any reason. Just from a macro level, I think I don't want to overemphasize that innovation is great and let's just innovate and innovate. I think government has a lot of responsibility to also make sure that innovations are monitored and potentially regulated. Like take the iPhone or the smartphone as an example. Most people now feel that they can't switch off from work after work, and this is women in particular feel extremely stressed about not being able to switch off and most people feel that their managers expect them to be online, and things like that, which isn't in the contract, but technology, not only sort of work, but even thinking about how it affects psychology of humankind, and like with the social media that you were mentioning, where there's some evidence that it leads to increased depression, suicide rates, etc. So if we do have that kind of evidence, or if we have evidence that some technology have a negative impact on our well-being, on our productivity, then counting that as innovation is a bit, I'm not sure that's right. Innovation should surely improve the well-being of people. So if you're being replaced by robots, and we have lots of unemployment, or if lots of people are disengaged at work and stressed after work, and etc., then that is innovation that has led to a psychological distress, let's say, in people. So this is the macro level opinion that I have, that some technologies need to be regulated when there is clear evidence that there's a negative impact on human psyche, let's say, or even functioning. But if we are realistic now and sort of go back to what we were talking about, when should it start? Well, for young people to be able to cope with the environment, they're getting education on all sorts of things. I can't see any reason to why they shouldn't be educated in how to survive in a more entrepreneurial world, let's say. Just to conclude with the fact that there's also, we talk about disruption and innovation, but there's a lot of opportunity in disruption. In every industry changed by disruption, the net effect has been total market growth. Of course, those opportunities need to be recognized and exploited, and that's again what I was talking about. A key thing in that is the people. People have to do that, and ecosystems have to be created for people to be able to do that. Okay, that's the bottom line. Finished now. Thank you.